Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the next series of videos, we're going to start talking about the complexities of creating a database. While the process of creating a database is relatively simple, the understanding of the two files, it may be a little more complex. So let's get into it. In the next series, I'm going to be talking about what is the data and the transaction log file. We're going to take an in-depth look in understanding the transaction log, as this is critical to understand. We'll give you some of the reasons why the transaction log growth files continuously grow until it consumes the space. We're going to show you obviously the methods of preventing the transaction log from consuming the space. We're also going to be talking about the recovery models that determine what type of backups you can do, whether you can do transactional log or not. And then we're going to understand the property of the database, such as the auto growth and sizing of it, and how this determines fragmentation and how this is important to manage. And then I'm obviously going to illustrate to you how transactional log files grows, and if you don't do anything about it, then it will continuously grow until all the physical disk is consumed. And again, I'm also going to be demonstrating and talking about what are virtual log files and how to manage those also. And then we're going to be talking about, as I said, the recovery models and their roles in backing up. So let's begin by understanding this right here. And that is, what is a database file? So before I create a database file and mention a database file, it's important to understand, as a database production DBA, the critical roles that those two files play when you create a database. So let's begin. So when you create a database, there are two primary files that are created by default. And they are the data file and the transactional log file. And I can show you that right now. So if I go to your SQL, you'll see that if I refresh it, I don't have any databases yet. I'm going to right click, new database. Let's just call this test. And you can see right there the database files. This is the data file, and this is the log file. And remember, when I say OK, it will create me a database with those two files, the data file and the log file. And then remember, the specifications are based on the model database as a template. So as soon as I go OK, and we have a database created. And there it is. You can right-click it, go to Properties, and you can see the files by clicking on this. And obviously I defaulted this to the C drive, but again, in a production environment, we don't do this. So let's cancel this. So actually we can delete that because we don't really need it now, just to illustrate that the two files are created. And let's go back here. So the primary purpose of the data file when it is created is to hold all the data, such as tables, indexes, store procedures, and all of the relevant data. And while the data file actually is simple to understand and requires some management, the transactional log file, on the other hand, requires greater attention and understanding. And as I said, we're going to have several videos dedicated just to understanding what the transactional log file is and its purpose and how to manage it. So let's look at that right now. So what are the transactional log files and its purpose? The primary function of the transactional log is this, and that is to record all changes to the database. So anytime you delete something in a table, or you update a table, or drop a procedure or a constraint or tables, or anything modifications to that database, it's recorded in the transactional log. And now, having just said that, you can probably appreciate the understanding and the importance of a transactional log file. If it records all the changes and you destroy that transaction log, you will not be able to recover everything you did to that point if you lose the transactional log file. So the management and an understanding of the transactional log file is critical. And as I said, we're going to be spending several videos to that. One thing to note, it records changes sequentially. And that's why I said when we install SQL Server, that it's critical to put the transaction log on its own file so we don't have I/O contention. Another concept to understand about the transaction log is that all data is written to the transaction log first before it's committed to the data files. And while I'm being somewhat simplistic here, just for our sake of discussion at this point, this is all fine. And that is so that when you have a transactional log and it's recorded in a transactional log and it's not committed to the data file, if the system were to crash, then the transactional log file, it allows you to roll back that transaction. And we'll be talking about that concept further. It's a key object is needed to restore the databases. So obviously if you crash a database or delete a table and you need to restore it, then obviously you're going to need to restore the database with the full database backup along with all the transactional log files that you've taken. So that's an important concept to understand also. It controls the size of the transactional log and prevents the log consuming all disk. Actually, this is the backing up of that, but the existence of a log file that's backed up controls this, and we'll be discussing that in depth soon. It's also used in the HA solutions, such as the log shipping, database mirroring, and replication. So it's a critical component in those high availability solutions. And obviously one of the most important things is that it allows you to recover to a point in time. So if you have been taking a full database backup along with the transactional backups, which you can consider as mini backups, then your data loss is going to be at a minimum. So now you understand the importance of transactional log file and how we must back it up also. But I'll be discussing that also. One thing is one of the most important things about transactional log management today is to prevent it from consuming the physical disk, and transactional log backups do that. So we'll be discussing that also. So the reason transactional log back file gets out of control, and you'll certainly appreciate that when I give you a demonstration, is because you've got transactional log backups occurring what's called in the simple recovery mode. And I'll show you how to recover from that. Obviously, there are times when very long transactions are occurring, like index building and many updates, and that can go on for a long, long time, and that can consume a transaction log file. And then obviously, I'm going to demonstrate to you the size of the transaction log by controlling the size of the transaction log by doing log backups. And there's a misconception that if you take a full database backup, that this will truncate the transactional log file, and I will demonstrate that to you that is not the case. So I think I'm going to leave it here, and we'll continue with the next video. But just to understand that the importance is that when you create a database, two primary files are created. One is the data file, which holds all the data, and one is the transaction log, which captures all the modifications to the database. Both are needed for the database, and the transactional log file is a critical component to understand. And in the next series of videos I'll be demonstrating, you'll get a very good understanding. So I think I'm going to leave it here and pick it up in the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.